Welcome back to Little Podcast, Big Conversations. We're so excited to bring you another episode today. Today, we are joined by someone who is redefining what it means to be an entrepreneur from the outside in. His name is Amardeep Parmar. Amardeep is the co-founder of Bay HQ, the UK's largest community for high-growth British Asian founders and investors. He's also the author of Startups for Outsiders, a practical guide for anyone who feels disconnected from the traditional startup ecosystem but wants to build something really impactful.
His journey is anything but ordinary. From growing up in East London to working as a tech consultant to being a writer on Medium and growing at the fastest rate to hit 50,000 followers to interviewing icons like Ev Williams and Mark Randolph and eventually creating Bay HQ to empower underrepresented employees. Today, his work spans community, building angel investing and hosting over 400 podcast episodes, all with one mission: to make entrepreneurship accessible to everyone.
So today we'll be diving into his book, his personal story, and the lessons he's learned about breaking barriers and building businesses. So let's get started. Welcome, Amardeep. Welcome to Little Podcast, Big Conversations. This is our second series and we're delighted to have you. We are actually in Amardeep's offices in his podcast studio. How beautiful is this? I've read your book and congratulations. It's your first book, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
I'd love to start off with what inspired you to write the book. And so tell us a little bit about your story and the lead up to writing Startups for Outsiders.
Sure. So been meaning to write a book for a long time, and there's a lot of different parts of my journey. But if I kind of stick to the writing track, writing is how it all started, from me going from the corporate world, the professional world, to what I do today. So January 2020, New Year's resolution, I'll start writing online, new year, new me, that kind of thing of like, oh yeah, but you know how you think you won't continue it. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do it for like a month. But it did really well, so I was able to quit my job for that. So a year and a half later, I was like, had millions of people reading my articles, my blogs, and is a platform called Medium that all of a sudden had this big audience of Americans. And once I quit my job, then I was doing a lot of ghostwriting. So I wrote as a lot of founders and CEOs across the world, and also wrote book proposals for other people. So one of them got published by Penguin, but I'm not allowed to say who it was for. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the funny thing is with a book, because it's quite a big project, it's like you want to do it properly, but at the same time, when do you get the time to do that? And kept putting it off. So there's a couple of false dawns of when I planned to write a book, but I didn't actually ever release it. Where I got a few thousand words in, but then the business needs, the other needs took over. And how I was looking at it is that with the book now, so Startups for Outsiders, the idea is that there's so many people with the community we do, so many founders we help, and so many people come from backgrounds where they don't have that privilege, they don't have access to that information. Can I make it in a format of a book that's very easy? So on the one side is the impact of like, how can I help people in an easy way, digestible format? And then from the business needs is that by writing a book, it then elevates your brand. And right now, it's still hard to write a book. Where say in 2 years' time, I'm kind of more worried about what happens with AI. If then nobody trusts you've actually written the book yourself, there's no real value in it anymore. So to me, it's like a timely thing of, okay, if I'm going to do it, I need to do it now while my edge is still there. And so I wrote it in summer and I wrote it in 5 weeks flat, which is because of my unfair advantages. Because I used to write blogs every day, I used to ghostwrite for so many people. I can write 5,000 words in a day, no problem. Other people can't. So in summer, when things are quieter, and we had the students in the office, that's when I was writing. And I can talk more about the process later on if you're interested. But that's what all kind of came about. And the idea is, what's the easiest book to do first is a more general overview book. And then I can go deep into different topics later on. But the easiest thing for this, each chapter is almost like a blog post of, say, about 4,000 words. And I can do that very easily. I could use all my existing knowledge and put it into a book format. And having it in a book form makes it much more readily available and easy to digest.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the tabs that I've got in the book that you've written. I mean, honestly, it's so practical. And I was describing it earlier as a little personal coach that you can have by your side, dip in and out, work out what you need to do, helps you navigate that whole startup ecosystem. You said in previous blogs and podcasts that a few years ago you felt like an outsider. What was a turning point for you which made you believe that this is the ecosystem that you want to operate in?
Total fluke. So when I first started writing, my original writing was about Japanese philosophy. So I've got a karate background. I did karate for about 15 years. So the original writing, there was no real end outcome of it. It was just like a new hobby. It was just a new challenge. I then became the editor for an entrepreneur's publication. And that again was a fluke. So I was part of the main group of writers on the platform. I was helping other people with their articles. One of the people was like, oh, you seem really good at editing. Do you want to become my editor? Like, yeah, why not? Kind of go ahead. But it wasn't that goal at the initial onset to, I want to get into the startup world. But I just had that exposure to it. And then a lot of my exposure was very Silicon Valley and New York based. And then when I tried to look at the UK system, nobody was really as welcoming. So I'm like, why is it that the Americans will all talk to me and I don't even live there? But the Brits are so much more guarded and like won't really let people in. And that's where that kind of frustration came about, and that outsider mentality of like, well, like I interviewed the founder of Netflix, I interviewed the founder of Twitter. These very, very top people in the US. But here, like I didn't know what events to go to, I didn't know who to speak to. And it just seems like such a weird thing for that to be the case of America, like top level people talk to me. Here, nobody replied to me. And it's like, how do you break that system down? And I think it's a whole bit with the outsider thing, and there's different layers to it, right? So one element is like ethnicity and race. And some people, you go to events and it's very much people from one background. But the other big thing too is that the class element of it. And I think especially in the UK, so like obviously I grew up in like around Ilford, I went to school in that area. How I speak now isn't how I grew up speaking. I grew up very much like Bernard, Chungraya, how's it going, one kind of thing. And that's just my environment. And what I found is that as I went through my career, I had to suppress that side of me. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean I'm not like smarter because I speak in this way. It just makes me easy to understand. But then I see different people who, they're just as smart as I am, they've got the same talent as I've got, but they don't have that know-how of how to navigate it. And once I was able to crack this ecosystem, it's like, okay, how do I now bring up other people behind me? And the outsider side is like, some people, for me, maybe it was, okay, race, ethnicity, class. For other people, it's gender. For other people, it's like disabilities. It's all different reasons why people might think that they don't fit in. And even with somebody who, on the external side, you think, oh, okay, they just naturally belong. Internally, they might feel a different way. And that's like why I use the term outsider as opposed to other terms, because you kind of define it yourself.
What do you think was the key moment when you decided that actually you needed to or wanted to like change your behaviour or how you talk to your language? Like, what was the kind of key moment where you found that? And then I guess, thinking of listeners, how can they kind of learn from your journey and some of that?
So I grew up in Ilford and I went to university in Bath. And it was like the complete opposite environment. So pretty much everybody I went to university with, like they were all lovely, but they couldn't understand me. So I had to learn how to enunciate. And it wasn't ever because for some people it's a more vicious kind of attack, or it's more bullying, right? Whereas me, it's like I just couldn't get my message across. So I had to almost adapt on the fly of, okay, how do I actually communicate with these people around me? And because I was so used to slang and things like that, I didn't actually know how to do that. And it's one of these things I even debate myself internally. Like, should I have still done that or not? Or should I have just tried to stick to myself and different things? And it's a different answer for different people. I know some very successful entrepreneurs who still speak like very heavily in slang. And because they're so amazing, people adapt to them. And almost in a way, now that I've entered the system, where I can try to bring out the original accent as much as I can, as still making sure I enunciate and make sure it's clear. But I don't want to hide that element of me. And there's an event a couple of days ago, which was quite a funny event where I was speaking to a couple of people and they were talking about accents and things like that, and talking about how they hated the way like the roadman accent was what they called it, right? It's like, that's how I grew up. So it's like, it's interesting some of those barriers still exist with these people who are judging. I'm like, you don't quite realize like who I am. And like, you're going to come to me for help pretty soon once you actually look me up. So for me, it's just very interesting to I'm now in a position of power where I can now open up the doors for maybe people from my background and help them through that. And I think the key thing is that, like, if you're thinking about people are going to judge me because of the way I speak, it's like, make sure you're understood, but you don't necessarily need to change the way you speak to match other people. Like, if you want to stand out and be different and be your unique self, do that. But just at the same time, how do you adapt? So for me, I generally speak fast, but what I do is I'm looking at your reactions, and then when I need to, I'll pause. So that's my way of dealing with it. I don't generally say each word slowly like this, because I really struggle to do that. But I do in that kind of rhythm of how I speak. And it's a thing that I've learned over time, because my natural voice is very fast and mumbly. And I've had to learn, how do I make that clearer? But that being a bit fast is actually an advantage in some regards, because people have to pay attention to keep up. So it's these different elements, and I kind of think about that rhythm and the cadence, the way I speak, quite a lot now.
The mindset shift that people have to make then, would you say it's about understanding yourself first and working out kind of what makes you authentic to other people and hone in on that?
Yeah, and it's about, if you feel like you've got to be somebody else, and it's a shame because many people do, right? They have quite a significant adaptation. But at the same time, I can point to examples of people who grew up in the same area as me, they didn't change the way they spoke, and they've sold companies for tens of millions. So it is possible, but it's about that inner confidence, right? Is that I now know that if I want to walk into any room, I can command that room. And that's something which has come from reps. But then I also know, I was speaking at a school earlier today. So because I was speaking at a school that's from the same area as I grew up, I was able to take off some of that mask and a bit more, and I got speaking the way they spoke. And that would mean that they relate to me more. Whereas in other rooms, I won't necessarily try to put on a posh accent, but I'll also understand that, okay, I'm going to have to speak in a different way to make sure my message has got across. And it's that adaptation of, like, how do you get your message across effectively for what you're trying to achieve? And if I'm trying to talk to school students from an underprivileged background, me speaking how I grew up is going to be more like, okay, he doesn't think he's above us. But in other rooms, even then, I think me speaking in that way, I'm now in a position of power. I was like, well, you just have to adapt and listen to me because now I'm useful. Yeah. And like, I can do that now, and I try to use that power I can.
It sounds like you've absolutely cracked the balance of being authentic, but also adapting to your audience or who you're talking to, and also the art of knowing when you want to dial up either of those, which is incredible.
I think on that as well, one of the things that also made me change the way I speak a bit as well is dealing with international people. Because for them, in an interesting way, me being born and raised in the UK and having that heavy East London accent at the time, it made it harder for them to understand me. There's kind of that empathy too, right? It's not always a case of an antagonistic relationship. Is if somebody's got English but they're not as comfortable or not as strong in it, then if I can speak in a different way that makes it easier for them to understand, it's also just being empathetic, because I can't speak other languages. So the fact that they're speaking to me in their second or third or fourth language, then if I can make it easier for them, then I should. And it's just that respect level too.
Amardeep, let's move on to kind of some misconceptions, because you kind of do talk about that quite a lot in your book. What do you think the most common misconception is about being a founder?
I think, well, one of them is that it depends on your environment, but for a lot of people, it's just this idea that there's a very big difference between, I would say there's no correlation between how successful someone seems online versus how successful they actually are. Because there's a lot of people playing founder. And then a lot of the advice you get sometimes is from people who don't actually know what they're talking about, but they're just very confident. And that, being able to unpack that is really difficult. And for a lot of people, they just say, oh, you should just quit your job and become a founder, which is really bad advice for most people, because there's a lot of stress involved. It's very difficult. You've got to do it because you really love it. And that's not for everybody. And there's nothing wrong with being an employee or being a member of a team, because that makes such an impact. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions of being founder is that so many people put forward this thing of that's the only way you can add value, which isn't true at all. Because every single founder who's ever made a big difference, they've relied on a very strong team around them. And you've got to just work out, like, what is it that you want to be? Another big part of that misconception too is that it's the whole, like, solo founder being everything, right? Which really is that founding team. And you could be, maybe you don't want to speak in public. That's fine. You don't have to. You could have a co-founder who wants to do that stuff. And I think a lot of people just don't index enough on that. It's like, if you have strengths in one area, that's amazing. Can you find somebody else to complement you and build that together? where there's so much of the kind of white knight founder of the amazing everything, which isn't always true.
Yeah, I always say at work, I'm sure you do as well, Sophie, that have giants around you with the expertise that you need, because you don't need to know it all, right? As a leader or a founder, right? You don't need to know it all. You talk related to that. You talk about dodgy guru wisdom and semi-true success stories flooding that startup space. How do founders develop that filter for good advice versus kind of, harmful myths, dare I say it?
I think sometimes a big part is like, does it sound too good to be true? And often it is then. But it's also, when you look at people who are very, like with our own content, right? We don't over-optimize it. Because if you over-optimize, you go to the lowest level of like clickbait essentially, right? And with a lot of content online, it's about how do you make money quickly? Because that's what's going to hook people. But the reality is, if it was that easy, then would they be making videos about it, or would they just be doing it and making money? So it's kind of looking at different people's incentives. And I think it's psychological, right? It's like, it's interesting if you look at why somebody is making the video in that way. And like, I'm part of this world, right? I'm part of the creator world, I'm part of the YouTube world. I know why people are doing things the way they're doing it. And if you can kind of look through that lens of like, are they doing this because they want to sell you a course? Then of course they're going to tell you that entrepreneurship is easy. And of course they're going to tell you you should trade and you should do stuff like that. And I think that's one of the big parts of it, is understanding what's the incentive of this person to do this. Is it ego? And if it's ego, you don't want to listen to people driven by ego. Is it that they actually care and they want to give back? And that's why I think we've been able to do very well, is that people know we're doing it for the right reasons. And same thing, every panel we have, we don't get on people that we don't like. And like, it's kind of it's a weird negative thing, right? Is that you'll know who I rate highly by who I will put on a panel, by who I use the stories of. There are many other people, I won't talk badly about them, but they just won't appear on those panels. They won't appear in those places. And that filter and like that kind of sense check, hopefully, for example, from the book, if you have a base level of information, it's easy for you to spot when other people are making stuff up. And having multiple different opinions is always really good. Like even when I say with my books, like listen to other people too. Because if you're only listening to one person, that's where you're at risk. Because that's where you can get led down a line which maybe isn't true for you. And with every founder, everything you're trying to build, it's going to be based on your individual circumstances, which any piece of content isn't going to know. They don't know like what's going on with your children or your parents, or like what's happening at home with you. So if they're telling you need to work 15 hours a day, they might be able to do that. It doesn't mean you can. It's like, how do you adapt for that too?
What's the most surprising thing that you've observed with founders, especially in the early stages when they're starting out?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that you have to be a level of delusional to start this in the first place. Otherwise, like, it's just ridiculous. Like, there's no, like, you've got to be a level of crazy to think, okay, I can build $1 billion company. And only time tells if you're crazy or if you're visionary. Yeah. And I think it's a phrase where it's like, the only difference between a madman and a visionary is whether or not it works. They act in the exact same way. And that's really hard to filter at the beginning. And this way it comes down to that credibility of like who you are and what you're doing. And I'd say like at the beginning, one of the big mistakes founders make is that they try and skip ahead. And they think it's all about just the bluster and the front. But any investor worth their salt is going to look into your background, and they're going to look into what you've done and being able to show that evidence. And it's driven by the whole culture online about you can get it easy and it's all just make money and stuff like that. But any investor or anybody who's going to potentially work at your company, they're going to want to see what have you actually done as opposed to what do you talk about doing. There's a lot of people like, oh, I've got a cool idea, let's collaborate. It's like, but what have you done on that idea? Have you made any steps? Have you actually progressed? Or you just think, I'm going to come in and save the day for you?
Yeah. I think just linked to that, when founders talk about, this is what I did and you should do that and this is advice that I would give you, what would you say is the one piece of advice that you actually have heard repeatedly but you strongly disagree with?
It's the burn the boats theory. So I can't remember who it was some kind of conqueror. It was like they entered a new land and they burnt all the boats so that the traveling party, the army, had to go and take over a city because they had no food left, they had nothing like that, which is actually like, I think, a really bad idea for most people. So a lot of founders say like, oh, what you should just do is like have a really bad relationship with your old bosses. Like you should just like burn all the bridges so that you can't go back to your old life and then you have to go forwards. And I'm like, yeah, like for example, when I quit my job, is that the bosses of the old company, they said to me, like, if you want to come back anytime in the next year, you can. So they gave me that olive tree, which meant that I could go out to being like, I can try my best. If it doesn't work out, I've got something to fall back on. Whereas there's some founders who will say like, no, you shouldn't have anything to fall back on, because then like you're not going to try as hard as you can. But the reality is like 90% of founders are going to fail. So if you burn all the bridges with all your old relationships, then it's not the person telling you to do that who's going to suffer, it's you who's going to suffer. So there's no, like, being respectful to other people and like just maintaining relationships doesn't cost you anything. And it doesn't mean you need to be somebody's best friend and go to like the pub every week with them. But just like leaving on good terms, like there's no problem with that.
Yeah, and also putting that amount of pressure on you as a founder is actually unnecessarily stressful.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and as an HR professional, I'm always saying never ever burn your bridges, because you just never know, right, what the future might hold. So yeah.
And it's like you never know, like your old boss might be mates with the person who's your future investor.
Yeah.
And like all this kind of stuff, like they're going to do reference checks on you. And you have to be incredibly like 1% of the 1% to get away with being like an arsehole to people, right?
Yeah, sure. Out of all the people that you've spoken to, all the founders over the years, and all the conversations and part of your book, what would you distill as like those kind of core principles for the founders, and particularly for those listening that are thinking, oh, I might have an idea. What do I kind of do with that? How would you distill that for them?
I say one of the biggest things being resourceful, and it's just that can-do attitude. Because a lot of people, and we obviously see a lot of them where they're like, oh, like I need you to tell me if my idea is good. It's like, I don't know, like what am I going to do? Like if you've got to prove to me that your idea is good. And it's that mentality of like, I will just figure stuff out. And if you're waiting for somebody to come and save you, then being a founder isn't the best plan for you, right? Like you could work for somebody else, you could go to somebody else with the idea and get them to be the leader. But if you want to be a leader and you want to build your own company, you've got to be able to go, okay, cool, I'm going to figure it out. And like, it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to find a way. So like being resourceful is the number one thing. And there's also that persistence. It's that going to be that obsession with whatever you're trying to build, where when times get really hard, that you don't give up, and that resilience. Because I think for so many people, like they have the talent, but it's like, how much are you willing to suffer? And if you're not willing to suffer that much, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. But it's also, you can just learn along that journey. But for so many people, it's not the first year that things take off. It's not the second year. It could be the third year, the fourth year, the fifth year. And you need to survive into that time. And part of that's like, are you in the right place in your life right now? And it's like, if there's things going on, is this really the right moment? And like, how do you play? You can, for example, you can dabble and you can do things like that. So like, get that like journey started. But that resilience piece of like, this is going to be hard. And like, is that exciting for you, or is that intimidating to you? And there's got to be some level of like that excitement, like, oh yeah, like it's going to be hard, but I'm going to find a way to do it. And you have that kind of, you can grow that aura about you, but you've got to be able to just be like, okay, I know it's going to be hard, but I really care about whatever I want to do, and I'm going to try and do it anyway. So resourcefulness, resilience. And another thing is just like not setting limits on yourself, because I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, especially from people from corporate backgrounds or from like traditional backgrounds, is that they're like, oh, I'm just not the kind of person who could do this. And it's like, well, all the people who've done it, they weren't like, none of them just came out of the womb and were like instantly billionaires, right? Like everyone came from somewhere. And that idea that like you can't do it, as soon as you can only be right about that. So if you say you can't do it, you can't do it. If you say you can do it, you might be wrong, but at least you can be right about that too. And there's so many people I think I see that they start off with that mentality straight away of like, oh, there's no chance. And then it was like, there's no point in trying. You've got to, if you're going to do it, you've got to at least believe in yourself enough to be able to go for it. And the other bit too is like the magnetism side. So it's like, you've got like, no matter how incredible you are, people have got to want to work with you. Whether that's a co-founder, you've got to be able to maintain that relationship. You're going to grow a team. People have got to want to work for you. And if you can't be that person that people want to work for, you're not going to get very far. Investors, same thing. Customers, like if you're interacting with customers and they don't like you, why would they keep coming back? And I know that I've got this in the book, so I'm trying to remember what the other things are. Yeah, but it's like that element at the beginning. And a big part of it is just, resilience, resourcefulness, magnetism, and just like that attitude that like, this is going to work out. It's going to be hard, but I'm going to find a way.
It's incredible. And I think keep ploughing through because sometimes people on the outside see almost like the glamour of it and someone being the founder and having their own business. What they often don't see is the other side of it and the hard work and hours that have gone into ploughing into that. And I guess based on that, I'd love to know kind of if you see any habits or kind of daily rituals or just rituals in general that are linked to the successful founders, like things. Is there any commonality in the things that they're doing that help them be successful?
I think there's a lot of hindsight bias with a lot of these kind of rituals, where there's a lot of people who say they've made their money, they've retired, well, not retired, but they know, like, they've got a huge team. And it's like, oh, you should do yoga every day for 2 hours. Like, you can only do that when you've got a team of 100 people. You can't do that at the beginning. And for many people at the beginning, it's just like surviving somehow, especially. So like, I would say in this period from say September to the end of November, I'm working 80 to 90 hour weeks every week. And I'm aware of that. I don't try and hide that. And that's the only way that this stuff is getting done. But that's now put us in a position where we can now hire people. So it's a very conscious sprint. I know I need to overexert for a small amount of time to be able to get to that position. Whereas if you don't do that, then maybe you're just kind of in this wobbly zone for a while where you can't really have that escape velocity and you'll kind of get stuck. So it's kind of think about life in sprints. And I think it's very difficult to have work-life balance overall, like every single day. But you can do it in sprints and you can be, okay, I'm going to work hard for this season. And then December, I'm going to relax a lot. And I think change the mentality from how to make every single day perfectly balanced to, okay, this is going to be a sprint, but it's going to be really intense, but then I'm going to make sure I plan the time to have downtime afterwards. And as you get further through your company, the less intense those sprints have to be because you've got a better team around you, you've got more resources. I'm trying to think of other rituals because people have all different, and it's also that whole different personalities can win. And again, like you could be the most introverted person ever and you just partner somebody who's like massively extroverted and they do all of that stuff and you just actually stay in the lab or you just stay like at your laptop coding away. So it is kind of personality dependent on what you enjoy. Because now people consider me very extroverted, but they don't see my life like it's like the top of the iceberg, right? Because actually we have all these events, but then what I do is I don't do any one-to-one meetings because I need to just recover my social battery. So I exert myself at events, and even when I get home, I need like an hour or two just like decompress. And nobody sees that side. They just see like when I wind up the toy, right, and like have this whole exuberance. But in order to do that, I have to sacrifice other places in order to make that happen. But the other big thing is like, so on that ritual side too, is that make sure whoever it is that loves you, like make sure spending time with them, and whoever you love, well, hopefully it's a mutual thing, then it's also like being active, for example, of whatever that means to you. And like making time to just like laugh and have a bit of like levity in your life. And it can be with like co-workers, it can be with co-founders. But if life gets too serious, you're going to start hating what you do. And when you hate what you do, it's very difficult to do that transformational, world-changing work.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the most important parts of your book is networking. I loved that section because it's actually quite brutally honest. And I think that if I think about my children, and you've met my daughter, they would hate going to events and making small talk and building relationships at network because they're a totally different generation. They are used to kind of doing everything online, and like the thought of networking would scares them, right? And even I'm like, networking, have to go to this event, meet this person, build relationships. It is so brutally honest. And talk a little bit about that actually, because you've talked throughout actually this episode around, I did this event, I just did a talk this morning at school. How can people really navigate and feel comfortable with that side of things, especially the younger generation that really struggle with it?
Yeah, it is really interesting about the younger generation as well, because you definitely do see it in the way that people interact.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of work with universities as well. And it's that difference in, like, for example, with like millennials will meet and will hug. Whereas for like Gen Z, it's like they don't really touch and things like that. And it's just interesting, like interpersonal dynamics is just a bit different because I was in that generation where obviously we had online stuff. The majority of the way we engage with people was in person. So we're very used to that. But as you go through the generations now, they're not as used to just that random meetups and stuff like that. And I think when you're looking at that confidence side, one is like, you just have to be uncomfortable. And the only way you get out of it is by putting yourself in that situation. And there's no shortcut to that. You can't just, oh, I'm going to suddenly become amazing at networking. Because I originally started podcasting over 430 some episodes ago because I was insecure about the way I spoke and I was nervous. And if you look at the early episodes, you can tell that. And then when people are like, oh, how have you come, like, were you always this confident? No, I wasn't. And if you look from people who went to school with me, people who went to university with me, people in my early career, they'd be shocked at the way I am now. But the only way I got there is by just sheer reps. And most people aren't willing to do that. So if you're willing to do that and other people aren't, you've got an advantage straight away. And all it is just turning up. And if you forget about everything else, all of the other hacks and this and that, whatever, if you just keep turning up, sooner or later, you're going to feel more comfortable. And it's looking at the minimum fear, right? So let's say you go to an event and you don't even talk to anybody. You just go and that's your goal. You're just going to go to that event and come home. And that's fine. And then next time you go, maybe you talk to the person next to you and you made one friend. Cool, that's great. But I think what happens is some people, they put so much pressure on themselves to go to an event and like take over the entire room or meet everybody, which you don't need to do. Like, as I went through this, now I can do whatever I do. And it's obviously, as well, once you have a bit of a network, now generally every time I go to an event, I know some people there already, then I'm meeting the people that they know, and that makes life easier. But if at the beginning you just turn up and all your only goal is to just turn up and just sit there and you don't even have to chat to anybody, and then that's a win. And then next time you talk to one person, the next time you talk to two people, and you're just slowly building up that like expanding your comfort zone, right? So when you're about getting out of your comfort zone, you don't need to go straight from, okay, I'm nervous, to, okay, I'm going to go and do a talk in front of 1,000 people. Because it's just like, think about it as if you're doing like exercise. You don't go from not going to the gym to now I'm going to bench press 1 billion kilos, right? But you just do a little bit more than you're comfortable with. Get used to that. Do a little bit more, get more comfortable. And then over time, as it compounds, you turn into this.
Yeah, and yeah, you're so right, because getting outside of your comfort zone actually builds confidence, right, in the end. So, and I like the idea of just take a step. It doesn't need to be big, right? Just go. You don't have to say hello to anyone. Just go and then build it from there. That's brilliant. I just want to talk a little bit about breaking barriers and kind of this need of meeting people's expectations. You talk about it at the beginning of the book, and I think coming from an Asian heritage as well, you're often got expectations from being Indian or whatever your background is, but also being British and everything that comes with all being in between cultures and everything. In the startup world, you'll have expectations from family, from investors. How do people navigate that and kind of stay true, I suppose, to themselves and kind of break that barrier of kind of doing what they need to do rather than the expectations of others?
So this is like my constant problem at the moment, right? Is that now, so say I get about 1,000 messages, no, like well over 1,000 messages a month, easily. And in the busy weeks, I interact with like over 1,000 people a week. So I can't be everybody's best friend. And like, there's no way that scales. So for example, when I was talking at the school today, some of the people come up to me like, oh, I'd love to like have a chat with you one-on-one. I'm like, that's not going to happen. Like, there's just no way I have that in my timetable that I'm able to do that. And this is where the whole bit about community comes into play. And the hard thing is that we're not used to that. Growing up, you people please, right? That's how you go about things. And it's that courage to be disliked in some way, which is really hard to grow. And it's taken me a long time to get here. And I mean, some people get annoyed at me, or not annoyed, but like, oh, he doesn't care, or he's short with me and stuff like that. But yeah, that's because I'm replying to 100 emails in the hour. So I'm not going to like write you a massively flowery email because there's a lot of demand on that. And a big part of that, I think, is just the more open you are about things, the more people can understand. So because I'm very clear that like I get way too many messages, I'm overwhelmed, I'm working a lot of hours. If you still get annoyed at me, then that's on you, that's not on me. Whereas if I make it seem like, oh yeah, I'm just chilling on the beach all the time and I'm ignoring you because I'm too big for you, then it's different. So when you navigate those expectations, the big thing is just say what you're thinking. And as soon as you start to bend too much and you're uncomfortable with something, then you're just creating problems down the line. And I think a lot of people do this, say, for example, with freelancing, things like that. It's okay, you've gone in at list price, which is the minimum you're happy with, and then somebody negotiates you down. So you've accepted a job. But then if you're not happy with it, then you just start to resent it. And all you're just doing is like, you're then not putting your effort properly. And it's that thing sometimes about not everything has to work out. And it's sometimes better to walk away from something that's not what you want and not what they want, rather than compromise where actually it's non-negotiable for you. And it's okay, because it applies to like all areas of life, right? Is that if their expectation of this, and that's not something you want to do, it's better to just say that. And obviously you're passing up an opportunity, but then it's better to pass up the opportunity than just be miserable. And then if you then say that to them like 6 months down the line, it's the whole thing, say with them, like, oh, you didn't put the bins out 6 months ago. If you say that 6 months later, you've just created a huge problem, because now that they know you've been angry at them for 6 months and not told them, and you damage that trust.
It needs to be timely.
It needs to be timely, and it's like and it's hard because I'm saying no to people basically constantly, and then some people aren't going to be happy about that. But it's also, is my job to make everybody happy, or is my job to be effective at what the mission is? And it's two different things, and being able to dissociate, that is the key metamorphosis I'm going through.
Yeah, I think that's I think saying no is something that people struggle with a lot. And what you've said about being focused on the mission actually is really on point. It's just practically it's so hard for people to say no. What do you think there's a difference though between family and investors, for example, in the startup world? Because obviously you had a turning point, didn't you? You left your corporate career to start something really quite unknown. You were an outsider yourself. How did your family feel about that, and how did you handle that?
So I'm incredibly lucky that, so I was a consultant for 7 years, and obviously my side hustle was out earning my day job by the time I quit. So what I did is I took a week off in February 2021, and I made a little PowerPoint presentation about like, this is my life plan, this is why I think I should quit my job and stuff. And I presented it to my family, right?
Really?
Yeah. And my dad was like, I don't know why you did that for, like, you'll be fine, it'll work out. And my dad was very nonchalant about believing in me, which is rare. Like, many people don't have that. My dad was like, oh yeah, you'll be fine, you'll be happy, like, go and do it, right? Do whatever you want. And it wasn't from him not caring about my perspective. It was just, he had that so much belief in me. It's like, whatever you do, it's going to work out, and I'm sure that you can figure it out. And a big part of the turning point of where, because there's a year between me quitting my job and the BHQ, a year and a half. So my dad passed away in that time. And that's a big reason why I do what I do, is that I'm very lucky that I had family that believe in me, and family like, you'll be fine, it'll work out, whatever it is, right? There wasn't a worry that I wouldn't figure it out to them, whereas many other people, a lot of times when family do have these expectations, it's because they're worried about you, right? They want to make sure you're okay. And it's not being angry at them for that, but it's just, sometimes I look at it as like asymmetric information, right? You know more about yourself than they do. So how do you look at the information you have, and what's a bit that's maybe missing for them? How do you show them, okay, look, this is going to be okay because this, and this. And if it isn't okay, I can also do this, or I can work it out in that way. So being able to communicate with people and not just getting angry at them, but okay, sometimes they're warning me because they're worried about me. They want me to be okay. But then you've got to be able to convince them, like, no, I know what I'm doing. But not just by telling them I know what I'm doing. It's got to be, oh, look, I've considered the options, I've done this, and I've thought about it properly. And bridging that information gap with them is like really important, because that's where so many arguments come from, or disagreements come from. It's because you're coming from different bases of what you think is true. And when people are kind of talking to family, like, it's part of the reason community exists, right? Is with the people who aren't lucky enough to have somebody like my dad, can I build a community for people like that, right? And that's dad's legacy and all the kind of emotions wrapped up in that, right? But I think that's something he'd be very happy about that I've done. Beyond all the fancy crap, is that people feel like they belong, people feel they're supported. And that's kind of a legacy of what he gave me that I can now give other people. And it's also the case of, like, at the end of the day, if your family don't believe in your family, whatever against it, it's your life at the end of the day too. And you've got to be able to have that, again, courage to be disliked amongst your family. Not even disliked, but just for them to prove them wrong down the line. So one great example of this is Navjot Sawhney. So he's the founder of the Washing Machine Project, which now is like world famous, and is like, have like his manual washing machines all over the world, in like Gaza and the Congo and all kind of war zones and places, and making real difference to people's lives. At the time, his family thought it was crazy for quitting his job. But then now he's been able to like build up over time, like, and he's proven what he was doing. And now they couldn't be like more proud of him, more happy for him, right? And one part of that is like, it's not having a chip on your shoulder about proving people wrong. It's about like, okay, they need more evidence, and I'm going to get them the evidence, and then they'll understand why I'm acting the way I am.
It's so funny you mentioned Nav. Honestly, it's brilliant what he's doing. So yeah, hopefully get him on the show. But I honestly, what you've said is so true. You've got to see it kind of from different perspectives and bridge that gap in terms of knowledge and information. And I think, once you say, actually, I've thought about it, I've really thought about it, and I've looked at it from these different perspectives, this is what I'm going to do, then I think anyone would say, okay, actually, he's done his own work.
The other thing was, like, when I quit my job to become a writer, if one of my friends had done that, I think they were crazy. So it's like, it's only because I went through that journey. But if one of my friends, when like I grew up and we went to the same background, the same university and stuff, I'm like, you're quitting your consulting job to become a writer, like, I would think they're weird. So it's like, I can understand their perspective of like why they'd think that, right? And it's sometimes, we can overrate ourselves about how understanding we are. And it's like, actually, no, if one of our friends had done what we're doing, we would probably think they were weird. So it's kind of, okay, having a bit of humility about that too. Like, it's not that I'm so understanding. It's like, actually, I probably might act the same way they did too.
Like, I get a sense from you, though, from talking to you and everything you've done, is you are so clear on who you are as an individual and what's your authentic self, but also everything you're doing and delivering and your mission. You're so laser focused on that you've then been able to, over the years, not only adapt yourself so that you can make the most and really build on all of your strengths, but also allow others around you to feel like you know what you're doing, and then learn from you as well, which is incredible. And I think that's something that not everyone is able to do. So I think even just them hearing you talk is incredible.
I think it's one of these weird things of like, most conversations I'm in, I'm now the authority. And like, how did this happen? I'm just some random kid. And it's a weird adaptation of like the perception of how people perceive me over time. Where, how old am I now? Well, it's like 5 years ago when did the writing start? Well, I guess it's 5.5 years ago. I was just some random consultant, didn't have any following, like only had my friends on social media. And then now I am this like authority or like leader in some way. And it's a really weird mental thing to go through, because in my head, I'm still that like, you're still the same person, right? And it's weird how that perception shifts over time. And it's really interesting, like internal dynamic of what you're going through there as well. Because sometimes I talk to people, I'm like, you're way more like, I kind of become the adult in the room a lot of the time. And I'm like, but who's going to help me kind of thing, right? It's like, especially, okay, with part of that too is like, it's something which I've reflected a lot, right? So one of the elements is, once my dad passed away, my dad was that person that I fully trusted, who I could look up to, and like who, when things happened. And then since he passed, I've kind of become that. And I'm like, but who's my escalation point now? So we have a board, we have those kind of people, but it's not the same as like my dad. And that's a really weird thing of where I'm now, why am I the person in charge? And like, why am I like, and I think sometimes people look up to leaders, I think put leaders on a pedestal. It's like, I'm like, most other leaders I know, they have the same doubts and the same things I have. It's not even necessarily doubts, it's just that it's kind of more like, it's the nuance behind that, right? And like, so many people who are done so many incredible things, they still kind of think about things like, how can they improve? And there's these different gaps there too. And like, one analogy I always use as well, I've made it up and I really like it, but it's like 2 types of confidence, right? So one is like egg confidence and one is avocado. So egg confidence is what most people consider confident. So it's like a smooth on the outside, hard outer shell. The problem is, as soon as it comes under a bit of pressure, it cracks and it's just gooey inside, right? Whereas on the avocado side, you can be a bit rough and vulnerable on the outside because it's totally fine. Like, and then if you get squished, you've got the hard core in the middle. And it's a bit of like, how do you build that hard core? And for me, for example, I did karate for many years. I keep proving to myself I can do new things. And that's a muscle. Like, how do you grow that muscle? Because I can sit here and be like, oh, you just become confident. But it's not that, right? So it's like, how do you go through that process and how can other people replicate that for themselves? I think part of it is just keep doing things slightly out of your comfort zone and proving it to yourself that you can do it. And then the world doesn't end. And the more you keep getting that evidence to yourself, the more you have that strong internal core. So when things go wrong or people think you're weak or whatever it is, you know in yourself, like, no, I'm strong. And that's how I can be so vulnerable and I can tell people about the emotions I'm going through. Because I'm like, I can show this vulnerability, but I know I'm going to be okay.
I think your father's passing has obviously triggered something in terms of what you want your legacy to be. Am I wrong on that? In terms of, you obviously have created Bay HQ, partly to educate and, do all the wonderful things that you do, right? And advocate, I suppose, for British Asian businesses. What do you want your legacy to be, actually? Why don't you tell us?
So again, like, because I reflect a lot, right? So one thing that people think about is like, what do you want in your tombstone, right? And part of the way I think about it, and it comes from my dad, the way he thought about things. My dad did a lot of good for a lot of people, but you wouldn't know that unless you spoke to them. So he never really, like, he did a lot of work for charities, he did all this stuff. He wasn't the kind of person to just shout about his achievements. And in a way, I think legacy-wise, if Bay HQ is about, like, hopefully I live for a very long time, if it's still about when I'm gone, but nobody even remembers I've created it because it's an institution, that to me is like something I've done well, where it's not about my ego. But the challenge is personal brands grow quicker than business brands. So for the first 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it's going to be attached to me. But I'm very much thinking about, like, okay, how do we get a CEO in charge after me? How do we get, like, well, I'm not even CEO now, right? My co-founder is. So it's like, how do you make sure that this is like goes beyond me? Because if in 50 years' time, people can come to our programs and we're still working with school kids and we're now impacted like hundreds of thousands of school kids, but nobody needs to know that it was me behind it. And to me, that's almost like, it's a more important part of their legacy in some ways, is that I've set up something which isn't dependent on me anymore. Because then I've created like a self-fulfilling like prophecy. Prophecy is not necessarily the right word, but like that self-fulfilling juggernaut, right? Where it's just Bay HQ is that thing you can trust, and Bay HQ is going to help these people. And I can then sail off into the sunset and sit on the beach because I know that the organization is being run well, because we've been able to inspire that next generation of leaders to take over from us.
Yeah, it's that lasting impact, isn't
Yeah.
it?
And as you move into kind of that next stage of everything you've built, do you have role models and people that you're leaning on to sort of give you that advice and coaching? Because as you said, you are that role model for so many people. So who do you lean into?
It's very difficult because what we're doing is so unique in some ways. Like, we've kind of, there's other communities, right, in the UK for different groups of people. But I think I would say this, but I feel like in a short amount of time, we've been able to catch up to all of them, and now we're peers of all of them very quickly. Whereas when we started out, like, okay, we want to be like that community, it was like, but now we are like that elite group already. And how I look at who I want to be like, someone like Navjot Sawhney, right? It's these kinds of people, like it's almost different angles. So one is like the integrity, morality kind of side of things, which to me is very important. Someone like Navjot Sawhney is really important on that. If Nav ever was like, so like Nav would just randomly call me and stuff, right? If Nav was to ever be like, I've changed and he no longer has that relationship with me, that to me would be like a canary. There's other people in that kind of impact space that I look at as like, okay, if they change their minds on me, then I've done something wrong here. Like another one there is like Nilesh Dosa, who's the founder of I Can, You Can Too. So they do a lot of work with school children who are on free school meals and gives them meals during holiday time. And the work he's been able to do, and I know that it's very genuine. And it's like those people that I can really tell they're doing this because of what they care about, as opposed to the awards and the stuff that comes with it. Those on that side, that's where I kind of look up to there. On the like startup business side, like I'm very lucky to the people I interact with on a daily basis. There's so many of them incredible things. So if you look at the board, for example, because the board is obviously we picked them for a reason, right? So like I'll highlight two of them. So Dimple Patel, so born on a council estate in Leeds. She was the first one to go to university, first one to get a scholarship. She's sold 2 companies and is the CEO of like a company that's worth like several hundred million now. And she's somebody who came from all the disadvantages and has been able to champion herself through it. And like, again, like her opinion, how she views us is very important to me. And how she's been able to just, whatever like ceiling that people might put on her, she just shattered all of them. And then now other people beneath her, or other people younger than her, not even younger, people in early parts of their careers can now see that example. And another person is Asesh Sarkar. So he's the founder of Salary Finance. And they're now over 100 million in revenue. But as a guy from inner city Leicester, he also lost his dad when he was quite young. And he's been able to build this company and have that impact on so many people. So what they do is they give loans to people through their employers to give them much lower interest rates. So people who might otherwise go to payday loan sharks, they can now get much safer interest rates, and it's backed by their employer. So his whole mentality is, okay, how do we create an economic system that works for the people in the working class and the people who don't have opportunities? Because how do you stop that vicious cycle of, okay, if you're from a working class background, you get high interest rates, which means then how do you get out of that? How do you then build a legacy for you and your family? And it's very much looking into different systems of how do we create a better and fairer system for everybody, and how do we the whole society wins together.
Such inspiring stories, I have to say, isn't it?
I was going to say,
it's incredible, some of these people that you mentioned, isn't it? Yeah.
People aren't inspired from what they've already heard and then listen to those stories.
Hopefully people go and look them up and read their stories.
In terms of wrapping up, I'd love for you to share with our listeners how they can follow you, connect with you, connect and read your book. Like, what would you want people to go and do?
So I think the base for most people would be the website, so baehq.com, so baehq.com. And that's where you can sign up and you can get like when all our events are happening, when our programs are opening. And the programs, some of them are for like young people, but there's also our incubator, which is like often people who've got a 9-to-5 job. How do you test out what a startup life is like? And it's a guided system for that. And those programs are all free, so anybody can access them. And then for me, my best platform is like LinkedIn. So it's Amardeep Parmar. I post it basically every day, but you get a good sense of me through that. In terms of connecting, like I said, like one of the things about me is I'm very time poor. So the best way is to come to the events, and one of the ideas, the whole thing is about like rather than building a cult, it's building a community. So it's not necessarily connecting with me. If you come to the events, you connect with other people in the community, and they're all amazing too. And it's trying to like get people's mentalities away from like that pedestal person to actually is the community and how do you help each other? Because if everybody's helping each other, they can do way more than if I try and help people individually.
The power of a group and the community is huge.
What a great way to end.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have absolutely loved this conversation. It's been so insightful and really inspiring. So thank you. And we know our listeners will as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, what an incredible episode that was. Absolutely fantastic. Ramneek and I are already reflecting on all of the great lessons from that episode, and we hope you are too. Please follow us on all of our social channels across Instagram and LinkedIn. Let us know what you thought of the episode, what your favourite moments were, and what you're putting into practice. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.